Valia sir has already joined.
Okay.
We should
Putting it
start,
started.
Dr. Benal, if Valia sir is there.
Yeah. Yeah. Ashish, you're getting. So, very good afternoon, everybody. Can we have the sounds of all the audience mute, please? Because there's a lot of background noise which we are getting. Yeah, Alembic people, we want the audience mute. Okay. Thank you so much. So, good afternoon, everybody. It really gives me a lot of pleasure to moderate this session on webinar of the COVID and what is the current scenario which we are going to face and how our practice is going to be totally an up scenario. Corona with its crown is ruling the world, and that's the culprit why we are all together here. In December 2019, the RNA coronavirus, it jumped the species barrier in Wuhan, Hubei province, China. Currently, the active strain is COVID-19, that's the SARS-CoV-2. And worldwide, every day the number is increasing. The gravity of the situation is that we have more than 20 lakh cases and more than 1,28,000 deaths and still counting. And how does it exactly happen? It hijacks the cell, the virus from the infectious droplet, either airborne or more commonly through the surfaces or the fomites. It enters the host body through nose, mouth, and eyes, attaches to the cells in the airway, produces the protein ACE2, releases its genetic material, that is the RNA in the infected cell, and makes millions of copies of it, that is the virons. System fights to clear the virus, and in severe cases it overreacts and attacks the lung cells, so it makes the person having difficulty in breathing. These are the various symptoms which all of us very well know, that is the cough, sore throat, high grade fever, and mainly being unwell. And there's a asymptomatic period as well of 2 to 5 days. There is every day new research is being added to this. The molecular pathogenesis of COVID is that it attacks the beta chain of hemoglobin, dissociates the iron from it, releasing the iron into the circulation. The hemoglobin loses its capacity to bind with oxygen, hence resistant hypoxia to multiple organs. Free iron toxicity, inflammation of the alveolar macrophages, damage to the lungs, viscous blood, disseminated thrombosis. So it really creates a havoc in our system. And this is a scenario of what happens when a COVID virus attacks our cells and engulfs the RBC. So we being COVID warriors, we have to work with a lot of balance, determination, and resoluteness. Every day, new recommendations are pouring in. We have new challenges. And mind well, our population is massive, dense, and complex. So for the people, what do we say? Stay home, stay safe. Because in this virus against war, the war against the virus, you can serve our nation by simply doing nothing. But is it true for us? In view of pandemic, elective medical and surgical procedures can be deferred, but pregnancies and deliveries will continue. So even in this precarious situation, we have to work. We, the custodians of female health, are facing unique challenge of managing this vulnerable group with two in tandem. So we can't stay home. We are the frontline warriors. With this, I would like to start the webinar. And I hope that this webinar brings some clarity to the confusions, right? So I would invite our first speaker and panelist, Dr. Valia sir. Valia sir, you are there?
Yes, yes. Can you hear me?
Sir. Yes, sir. So, sir, please guide us on how we can be running our OPDs, still maintaining social distance in this COVID scenario. Can you please take us, how we can manage a routine day-to-day work?
Just 1 minute.
Yes, sir.
Can you see my slides there?
Not yet, but we can see you, sir. The share screen option is there below.
Yeah. Where?
Meanwhile, for the audience, like initially we'll be taking you through the various situations, like that is the day-to-day OPD scenario, the antenatal care in routine patients and COVID patients. Then we'll come to the labor and OT management. And also everything will be included, like that is the personal protection and disinfection. And in the end, we have a lot of question answers and interactive session. So please keep watching. And I think now Walia sir is ready with his slides. Sir, please go ahead.
So greetings from Isha. First of all, we have a very good, as Binal has already mentioned, we have to be in touch with our local society and our parent society, FOXI, and as well as IMA and ICMR both. So there is regular update coming up, and COVID-19 being a new disease, everything is new which is coming up because there is no data of past which is available with us. So FOXI GCPR is a wonderful guideline and measurement of pregnant women. Measures for pregnant women to prevent COVID-19 infections are first and foremost social distancing should be the single most important intervention at population level. And do the 7, staying at home, social distancing, hand hygiene, respiratory hygiene, avoid touching the face. Hydration is also very, very important, and wear mask. And these are for all the females, pregnant or not pregnant. They have to follow this at home. Caution, unless proved, all patients are to be presumed as a positive. It is very much possible that carriers may be asymptomatic, and it would be prudent, therefore, to presume that every patient and attendant is a potential source of infection, and one must take all necessary precautions as advised by IMA or local authorities. Regular updates with local government and medical associations are very, very important. Update regarding local area zones like red, orange, yellow, and green, where the patient is coming from. So you can take utmost care according to the area from which they are coming. Positive patients are to be treated only at dedicated government centers or hospital as directed by government. And these are the way the zones are coming up, and government is regularly advising us. Now coming to the screening at the point of first contact at the clinic or the hospital is very, very, very important. The point of first contact, each OPD patient and relatives will be screened at the triage point at the entrance. Patients and relatives have to follow hand hygiene. As soon as they enter, they have to wash their hands with the soap. They have to wear masks, and it's a very compulsory. And the history and symptoms are elicited. TOCC, that is travel and transit history. The transit history is also very, very important. If patient says coming from London, but via Dubai, via Bombay, via Delhi, it has to be asked for. Occupation, contact, and cluster zone. That is very, very important. Symptoms like cough, fever, breathlessness, and GI symptoms are also coming up. And temperature is to be checked by infrared. Address should be confirmed by Aadhaar so as we can know that from which area they are coming. So, and there is a form which is to be filled along with the consent. I'll come to the consent later on. And this is the seating arrangement at the triage point. This is a temperature checking by infrared thermometer. Consent is very, very important. In addition to the routine consent taken at the time of admission, treatment procedures, delivery, or surgery, it would be prudent to include aspects related to COVID-19 infection. The point that should be included are the probable chances of patient contact or relative contacting COVID-19 infection while they are staying in the hospital. And consequences and precautions should be taken on both the sides. Hospital and doctor should not be held responsible for any mishap regarding COVID-19. And this has to be taken in both languages, whichever patient understands, and in English. So social distancing is very, very important. Maybe the passage, maybe the lift, and everywhere. And appointment scheduling and telemedicine can be used. Your Facebook, Instagram, website. Basic principle is to minimize hospital visits. In case of minor ailments, they can be treated at home by RMOs with certain medications which can tell them to take. And if it's not responding, they have to report to the hospital. And patients are requested to visit as per the schedule given by the hospital. And hospital website and Facebooks are to be updated, and patients are requested to see them on a regular basis. So this is spacing done at the waiting area and the reception area of the OPDs. And how to manage OPDs in this pandemic. So basic principles are again social distancing, hand hygiene, respiratory hygiene, universal wearing mask. This has to be followed by everybody, including patients, relatives, and the staff. So first principle is avoid crowding. Patients to be seen strictly by appointment, and walk-in patients are to be warned and discouraged. Only one attendant is allowed per patient in the premises. Waiting room should be very well ventilated and sitting arranged with proper spacing and distancing. Consulting chamber should be well ventilated with minimum person inside, not more than 4 people, including nurse and an assistant should be there. If a attendant wants to talk, the 1 or 2 person from the room goes out and that person, the attendant comes in the room. So patient scheduling, how it is to be managed. It depends upon staff numbers, availability of waiting space, availability of consulting and scanning rooms, nature of complaints of the patients, weeks of gestation, comorbidities. And in case of sonography, type of scan is to be seen, done. And the turnaround time from arrival to the exit. Prior telephonic appointments are must. Now, how do you disinfect the OPD and OPD area? Mopping of the floors with 1% sodium hypochlorite is important. All objects that are to be used by doctor and staff, including door handles, knob, writing table, pen, mobile, etc., have to be regularly sanitized. Once the patient goes out, everything is clean and sanitized. Minimum of physical contact of the patient is very, very important. The doctor has to wear the dress prescribed. Simple as a doctor's dress, gloves, mask, cap are very, very important. Frequent hand washing has to be followed. Opening and writing in the patient's file should be with the help of a patient. In fact, what we do is we don't touch the patient's file. And every time we take a new page and we prescribe the medicine, patient has, if we want to see the file, patient opens the file. So we don't touch the file. Consultant will call patient as per the hospital protocols. No linen, bedsheet or pillow should be kept in the examination table, so it becomes very easy to clean the Rexine or the Sanmica, whatever one has. After each and every patient, housekeeping will disinfect everything, as I have already mentioned. Consultant to change gloves after every patient, and all removed gloves to be put in a soap water bucket kept by consulting table to disinfect. And patients and relatives to then proceed to reception for documentation, scanning, and billing and cash payment. PPE kit description in detail will be done by Dr. Ashish. So protection in the OPD is for healthcare workers are disposable surgical cap, disposable surgical mask, work uniform, disposable latex gloves, and disposable isolation clothing. The mask, we know that we are supposed to use N95 if available. Now, what is the problem is many duplicate and spurious masks are available. No standardized masks are available. The thick two-layered cloth mask can be also used. Place mask carefully, ensuring it covers mouth and nose, and tie it securely to minimize the gaps between face and mask. Avoid touching the mask. Remove mask using appropriate technique. Do not touch front of the mask. Ideally, replace mask every 6 hours. Do not reuse single-use mask. Dispose them off immediately upon removal as per protocol. ANC visit scheduler. ANC visit should be minimized unless certain specific circumstances arises. And patients are to be encouraged for telemedicine and WhatsApp medicine, whatever we call it. The visit should be clubbed with sonography and other investigations. Ideally, 3 or 4 visits should be encouraged. Avoid dating scans. Scan at 11 to 13 weeks with investigations 20 to 22 weeks and 28 weeks for blood investigation, vaccination and NTD, and around 36 weeks. Gynec and infertility treatment are to be postponed. So this is again a scheduler. Dr. Nandita would also describe it in detail. And SMF India, yes, please. Any questions?
Yes, sir. So, yeah, the sonography is a mandatory tool. So we were looking forward to these guidelines, which I think you are now describing.
Yeah, I'm going to come. Indications for performing ultrasound scans, patient scheduling. This is the way we can go around with management of sonography. Dating scans between 6 and 10 weeks should be postponed, and dating should be done at early morphology 11 to 13.6 times. So first scanning should be around 11 to 13, so we can club it with double and morphology. Patients with bleeding per vaginum or pain has to be seen at any time when they come. The anomaly scan at 18 to 20 weeks may be delayed and can be done at a second trimester scan, T5 scan. Routine growth and Doppler scan should be postponed, and decision-making growth scan, Doppler between 28 to 41 weeks should be considered on a priority. The 36 weeks growth and Doppler scan is useful triaging tool. And the above mentioned prioritization will need to be modified depending upon the patient's and fetus condition. This is as per SMF guidelines. So basically we do 4 scans, 11 to 13 weeks, 20 to 22 weeks, and 36 weeks. And fourth, if required, suppose a patient is IUGR or a high risk group, then we do the 4th scan. So patient evaluation at first point, even in a scanning, we have to evaluate, like I already mentioned, in triaging and all those things. And depending upon the obstetric emergency, like if there is obstetric emergency, ectopic or APH, scan without delay. And the scan which can be delayed are dating scans, growth scans, and fetal medical procedures. Like procedures can be delayed. Yes, Binal, you have any questions?
No, this is perfect, sir.
And the scans which can be avoided are TVS scans. And US for reassurance, patient VVP is not moving and you're putting a scan, that should be avoided. Triaging or appropriate PPE, symptomatic TOCC, this is how we do triaging. So again, TOCC negative, you can scan with appropriate dress, like was what I have mentioned. But if TOCC is positive or you suspect COVID-19, you have to wear a full PPE, which Dr. Ashish is going to mention. So this is again a dress code which has been advised by SFM. So TOCC B and C, where a positive or a suspect, you have full PPE. Equipment sanitations are very, very important. Excess of ultrasound gel on the transmitter should be wiped off with a soft cloth after each examination, and gel can harbor a lot of germs. So it has to be can be cleaned with the water, otherwise LLD, a low level disinfectant. Transducer surfaces and cords should be wiped with an equipment vendor approved low level disinfectant. Every machine have their preference for a LLD. Equipment desktop edges, keyboard, transducer, resting stands, especially the side in close proximity to the patient, should be wiped regularly with LLD after each and every patient. Commercial wipes should not be reused. This should be disposed of in appropriate bins, and translucent cord covers like one used in laparoscopy camera can be covered with these things. Usually I cover abdominal transducer with gloves and transvaginal if required is with a condom. And I use regular commercial wipes to sanitize my probes and machine. So this is how you can use a glove for abdominal transducers, and a condom we are using for transvaginal. And no, this cord should not, or cable should not be lying on the touching the floor or the table or anything. One has to see all these things. Disinfectants are many which are been advised. Ideal is 80 to 95% alcohol, or Sterilium also can do. Mind you, one with the chlorhexidine should not be applied on the monitors and the keyboards, because everything becomes sticky. One can use 0.2% sodium hypochlorite, but you better contact the supplier of your machine and to find out which is the best one they recommend. I use this type of wipes on a regular basis, and they are very good and they are totally harmless. And these are available in Baroda also. Accelerating availability of final reports is also very, very important. Adequate staff must be available to accelerate preparation of reports. Lockdown conditions do not permit courier services. So, or one can mail them, or you just report them as fast as possible. So the patient goes out from the premises very fast. So pharmacy also spacing should be there. And there are ICMR guidelines which are the patients which can be tested. At ANC testing, one important thing is a pregnant woman who has acute respiratory illness with following criteria like history of travel or in a close contact of a laboratory proven positive patient, or she is a healthcare worker herself or hospitalized with features of severe acute respiratory illness should be tested for COVID-19. And a pregnant woman who is presently asymptomatic should be tested between 5 and 14 days of coming into direct and high risk contact. Sorry. And notification of COVID-19 cases is a mandatory. This one we must remember. And all positive patients should be managed at COVID-specified hospitals as per government guidelines. And quarantine for pregnant should be followed as per general population depending upon contact tracing. Chemoprophylaxis once in a contact, it can be taken by our doctors. And this is the summary like social distancing, appropriate PPE, appropriate gear, minimum distancing. Summary for reception is cloth care, protection care is goggles, cap, mask, And cash staff also, one should see that they wear goggles, the cap, mask. Housekeeping also should wear a cap, mask, and gloves. So practice dynamic staff posting and duty off. So this is a very important thing one can do. Or you can schedule your staff duties also, so they don't keep on coming in contact with patients. Doctors and nurses and our staff are our asset. Protect them, train them, keep the morale of the team very high. Stay at work, stay safe.
Okay,
Now
so
the
that
last
is
thing
stay
is,
work, stay safe. Yeah.
the last thing is very important. While going back home, what are the things which are, so as soon as you enter, you change the dress to a doctor's dress or a working uniform, and once you go out, change to your regular clothes, and ring up home when you start from the office. Someone at home should keep the front door open with a bucket of water and soap. Wash your hands and feet and everything. Keep your pen, sanitizer, keys in a separate box. Sanitize them. Wash your hands in the bucket and stand in the water for a few minutes. Meanwhile, use tissue and sanitizer to wipe the items you kept in the box. Wash your hands with soap and water again. Now enter the house without touching. The bathroom door is kept open. You take a full head bath. Wash your clothes yourself. Put in washing machine with high temperature setting and dry clothes. So reduce wife's or the husband's work. If wife is working, husband has to wash the clothes. So thank you. I have shown AK-57. So you are ready with the gear, a uniform, and a corona. And the final statement is "Jahan hai to jahan hai, jahan bhi hai, jahan bhi rahega."
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And that was really wonderful. And yeah, I'm happy to share that we have more than 99 participants who have logged in. Yeah, so that is wonderful. So that was Senior OB/GYN Consultant Dr. Ajay Walia, sir, IVF specialist from Isha Hospital. Thank you, sir, for the very practical inputs of how we can run our OPD. And now we go ahead in this journey, and I welcome Dr. Nandita Maitra ma'am, teacher of teachers, senior teacher from Baroda Medical College and Gynec Department. So ma'am, can you please guide us that how we provide antenatal care to our pregnant patients in this scenario? What is the impact of this disease on pregnancy, whether the fetus is at risk, and how would you approach if your patient is a suspect or a confirmed COVID? So kindly please guide us.
Thank you, Beenal, and good evening to all the participants. Why am I not able to move my slides? Okay. So the scope of this presentation, or the objectives of the presentation, is to understand the disease categories, the course of pregnancy in COVID-19 positive patients, pregnancy complications, vertical transmission, and prenatal care in the non-COVID and COVID positive patient. The disease has been categorized into mild, where the patient is symptomatic with stable vital signs. About 86% of the patients fall into this group. Severe, where there is dyspnea, hypoxia, and pneumonia, a respiratory rate of more than equal to 30 per minute, and a resting SaO2 of less than equal to 93%. And the third category is critical, where the patient has respiratory failure, shock, or multi-organ dysfunction. Now, whether the patient is pregnant or not, these percentages are similar. So what is the impact of COVID on pregnancy? Pregnant women do not appear to be more susceptible to the infection as compared to general population. Emerging available data suggests that pregnancy does not worsen the clinical course of COVID-19, but there are small data sets of pregnant women. And special consideration should be given to those with concomitant medical illnesses, because they might be more vulnerable to the COVID-19 infection. So, are there any complications? Women who develop pneumonia can have preterm birth in about 41%, preterm premature rupture of membranes, preeclampsia, cesarean delivery for abnormal fetal heart rate patterns, stillbirth, a small percentage of 2.4, admission to the NICU for 10%, and neonatal death. What about fetal anomalies? Currently, no data about the risk of congenital malformation if the infection is acquired in first to second trimester. But if the woman has maternal hyperthermia due to COVID or any other reason, there is a mixed data that there can be congenital abnormalities, especially a neural tube defect. Now, vertical transmission in the March uh, RCOG update, they said there is no scope of vertical transmission. But in April, they have come out with a new guidance which says that vertical transmission is now considered probable. Two reports have published evidence of IgM for the SARS-CoV-2 in neonatal serum at birth. But IgM does not cross the placenta, so this is probably a neonatal immune response to the in utero infection. A recent report published in JAMA found that 3 out of 38 infants had pneumonia within 2 days of birth, and their nasopharyngeal and anal cultures were positive. Based on this report, vertical transmission is now considered to be probable. So the details of antenatal care in the non-COVID low-risk patient are: reduce the number of in-person visits, time these visits to 12, 20, 28 and 36 weeks of gestation, group the tests, see if you can do an ultrasound scan and biochemical tests at the same time, restrict waiting times for the patient, and restrict the number of attendants or companions who are accompanying the patient. If possible, ask the patient to come alone or ask the companion to wait outside the hospital. Ultrasound has been covered by Dr. Valia. Vaccination should go on as per schedule. Now, instead of doing a full OGTT, which will increase her waiting time in hospital, a fasting blood glucose can be done. Enable telehealth, that is teleconferencing or video conferencing. Ask the patient to do home blood pressure monitoring if she has preeclampsia, blood sugar monitoring if she has impaired glucose tolerance or diabetes, check her weight, and do daily fetal movement counting. No specific restrictions about diet, and she should follow a generic diet with regular supplements. In addition to this, observe the standard precautions, the 7 safes which have been discussed by Dr. Valia. If the patient is high risk and non-COVID, and she has comorbidities due to such as hypertension, preeclampsia, diabetes, heart disease or chronic liver disease, or she is on immunosuppressive medications, she may need to be seen in addition to the 4 visits, the basic 4 visits. So if she comes to you, if she calls you with any complaint, she should be seen as soon as possible in a setting with resources to determine the severity of illness. And for these patients, should we advise shielding? That means this is a very vulnerable patient group. And in addition to the 7 safes, they should be advised more stringent safety regulations even at home. Patient may also report with obstetric issues such as preterm labor, and these patients, of course, have to be seen immediately. What is the approach to the COVID positive patient? Admission, isolation either in the ward or in the ICU based on the disease category. Put into place the infection prevention and control practices immediately. Assessment by a multidisciplinary team comprising of the obstetrician, physician, anesthetist, and the infectious disease specialist, and test urgently. And as long as the report is awaited, treat as COVID positive. So the diagnosis is based on the symptoms and TOCC risk factors. A positive test generally confirms the diagnosis. If the first test is negative and there is still a strong clinical suspicion for the disease, repeat the test after 24 hours. 2 consecutive tests 24 hours apart, if they are negative, then the diagnosis of COVID-19 can be ruled out. Now, radio imaging for disease categorization is a must, and it is quite safe. A chest radiograph carries a very low fetal radiation dose of 0.005 milligray, and a chest CT would have a fetal radiation dose of 0.01 to 0.66 milligray. So these are essential investigations and they should not be withheld. Now, do not assume that all the pyrexia is due to COVID-19. Consider other differential diagnoses and also perform a full sepsis screening. Hospitalization. The severe and the critical patients have to be admitted in the ICU and appropriate management given. Now for mild infection, until now all confirmed cases are being hospitalized in India for isolation as well as for the observation to watch for progress of symptoms. If the number of cases rise, then we may have to manage this mild group of patients at home. The goal of treatment is to maintain a saturation of more than 95% in order to maintain the diffusion gradient from the maternal to the fetal side of the placenta. What are the principles of antenatal care in the COVID positive patient? The need will depend upon the gestational age, stability of maternal signs and other maternal comorbidities. Routine appointments with the patient should be delayed until after the recommended period of isolation. And if the patient is stable and the patient may in hospital, the patient may be monitored by a non-stress test. Instead of using a stethoscope to check the fetal heart sound, one can use the CTG machine for this. Now the treatment recommendations, I have the FOXY GCPR suggests two regimens, neither of which are currently proven. The first one is hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, which has low quality evidence. The second one is the antiviral lopinavir or ritonavir, which is recommended in patients with hypoxia, hypotension, organ dysfunction, or high risk groups. Thromboprophylaxis should be considered for the patient in ICU because she is going to be immobile for a longer period of time. So which medications are safe? The common medications such as hydroxychloroquine, CHQ, azithromycin, lopinavir, ritonavir, and oseltamivir are safe in pregnancy. Remdesivir is safe, but it is only used within the context of a clinical trial. HCQ crosses the placenta and is contraindicated in patients with retinopathy and G6PD deficiency, and paracetamol should be the preferred NSAID. The drugs which are contraindicated are ribavirin and baricitinib, which are teratogenic. These are not recommended. And for women with respiratory compromise, the use of magnesium sulfate for either seizure prophylaxis or neuroprotection should be individualized so as not to depress the respiration further. What about other pregnancy medications? Antenatal corticosteroids should be administered only to those patients with threatened preterm labor between 24 and 34 weeks of gestation. It should not be given as a routine, even on slight suspicion, because it causes delayed viral clearance and an increased risk for mortality has been reported in some studies. If the patient has aspirin for any condition, then this can be continued, and the preferred tocolide is nifedipine. When to time delivery? If she has mild symptoms and there is no medical or obstetric indication for delivery, then she should be allowed to progress to term and go into spontaneous labor. For the hospitalized patient without pneumonia, with pneumonia but not intubated, some authorities have advocated delivery around 34 weeks of gestation in order to reduce the metabolic and pulmonary load. What about the patient who is intubated and critically ill? If the maternal situation is stable or improving and the fetus is extremely preterm, then for perinatal benefit, one may continue with fetal monitoring. The median time to recovery is, in mild cases, is 2 weeks, and in severe or critical cases, it is 3 to 6 weeks. An ultrasound to assess fetal growth should be offered in patients about 2 weeks following recovery. Now, there is no evidence that there is a fetal growth restriction in these patients. But with the SARS epidemic, 2/3 of pregnancy were affected by fetal growth restriction. So one has to keep this at the back of the mind, that fetal growth restriction may be present in these patients as well. Pregnant healthcare workers should consider the option of work from home and beyond 28 weeks, stop face-to-face contact with patients in order to help reduce the risk of infection. So these are some of the resources which are available and which I would recommend for the others to read as well. Thank you all for a very for this opportunity to share the presentation.
Yeah. Description,
Back to you,
and
Rita.
what I feel from your session is that less is more, and we have to have a very minimalistic approach, and as less as possible, but still the intervention at important time is very important. Now I would like to welcome Dr. Ashish Shah, a good friend of mine, at GMERS Guthrie Medical College. And I would say that you are at the helm of affairs because Guthrie GMERS is the COVID designated hospital in Baroda. So you practically are dealing with these case scenarios. So Dr. Ashish, please tell us that how you prepared your setup. You know, was there a special difference which you made in your infrastructure to make your preparedness of your labor room and your OT to deal with such patients, plus how you are protecting yourself and your staff. And please take us through the guidelines, like how would you manage a patient in labor who is suspect COVID or probably a confirmed COVID. And also, you know that labor can anytime go for non-progressive. So what if we need to take a cesarean? So off to you, Dr. Ashish.
Hello, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much, Binal, for arranging this webinar and giving us opportunity to talk about a newly emerging situation. Let me begin with saying that Corona is going to stay here for a long, long time. Though Guthrie is currently considered a COVID hospital, eventually we all will have to get ready to face patients with Corona at some point of time in our clinical practice. So with that, I'm going to cover mainly the aspects related to labor, cesarean, and the PP gears. Is there a question? Hello?
No, sir.
Hello.
All right. So the first thing that we all need to do is to prepare our labor room. Essentially, labor room has to be an isolation labor room away from the routine labor room where we can see only the COVID patients, and that is mainly to minimize cross-infection rate. Minimum requirement are as required in any labor room. Focusing on the electronic fetal monitoring or a CTG or some sort of equipment which would decrease the use of stethoscope. The baby corner should be at least 2 meters away from the labor table.
No, Ashish. I think there's somebody from the audience. Please continue.
All right, so we need to avoid cluttering of the room. The room has to be well ventilated. Now there is a confusion about the role of air conditioning in the room. If at all we are using air conditioning, it should never be a central AC. It should be a isolated AC unit. There should be a separate area for donning and doffing of the PP, which I'm going to talk about. There should be minimum persons inside, basically obstetrician, sister, pediatrician, and the sweeper, and anesthetist can stand outside as a standby if required. So basically 4 minimum PPE kits would be needed for one delivery. Birth companion may be avoided. Instead, we can ask the birth companion to be with the patient through a video calling system. Entry and exit of the personnel should be restricted once the patient enters into the labor room. And we need to carry out mock drills to train everyone for the behavioral changes which are required from our traditional practices. Similarly, a separate isolation OT is required with minimum requirement for the OT table and the basic things. Personnel required are the obstetrician assistant, sister, pediatrician, anesthetist, and a sweeper. So minimum 6 PPE kits would be needed for one CS, and the rest of the things are same as I have said for the labor room. Coming to labor triage, we should have a standard operating procedure in every labor room to receive and manage a patient of the COVID-19. So it should begin with communication from the patient end. As far as possible, patient should be given instruction in antenatal period to call before coming in. So telephonic assessment of the labor can be done and advice about whether she really needs to come or she can still wait at home and can do certain measures can be assured. If it's a referral, the referring center must call the COVID-19 hospital for triage preparedness and for donning of the PPE. Transportation of the patient must occur in a private transport vehicle or a designated ambulance, and the patient should be received in the reception area, and the patient attendant should be given the mask immediately. The frontline staff should be in the PPE, and the triage should be preferably in the same room where delivery is to be conducted, preferably with a negative pressure. I know that's not possible for most of us, but that is what is the recommendation is. Now coming to labor triage, asymptomatic positive or a mild disease patient should be quarantined at COVID care center, or they can have a hospital isolation if they are not in labor. Let me tell you at this stage that government has now divided all COVID positive patients management into 3-tier system. The first tier is a COVID care center where the asymptomatic patients are going to stay. If the patient with the severe acute respiratory illness requiring oxygen support comes, then that patient should go to COVID health center, even if not in labor. And patient with critical illness should be assessed with a quick sequential organ failure assessment score, which can be calculated with the basic 3 parameters, that is mental status, respiratory rate, and systolic blood pressure. And if the score is more than or equal to 2, the patient needs to be admitted in the ICU at COVID critical care hospital. The obstetric assessment then follows, which tries to assess whether the patient is having true or false labor, whether the patient is in early or established labor, what is the fetal status, and what is the approximate time to delivery. And presence of any other high-risk factor which would expedite delivery should also be considered. Coming to decision-making for labor, induction of labor should not be done just because the patient is COVID-19 positive, with the exception of a critically ill patient where delivery would relieve the extra metabolic and pulmonary load to the patient's body. Mode of delivery, WHO and many other such guidelines, including FOXI GCPR, says that CS is recommended only for obstetric indications. But contrary to that, data from China, UK, and Europe suggests that most of such deliveries have occurred by CS so far. Probably there are concerns about possible transmission through vaginal secretions or a prolonged timing for a normal delivery if someone is attempting normal delivery wearing a single PPE kit. Preterm labor, if the patient comes and if the patient is positive and asymptomatic, there is always a risk of worsening of disease in future. So there is a question mark whether we should allow such delivery or we should arrest the labor. However, tocolysis in general is contraindicated. Beta mimetics is absolute no-no. And overall decision would depend upon the clinical severity of the disease, the gestational age, and the couple's wishes. Then I'm coming to PPE kit. By now, we all know what are the components of PPE kit. There are various kits available with hood, without hood, having goggles, having face mask, and so on. So let us first understand how donning of the PPE is done. Before I say anything, let me clarify that PPE kit is for protection of an individual from getting an infection. It doesn't mean that we are trying to also ensure surgical asepsis and antisepsis. So surgical asepsis, antisepsis, wherever are required, has to be done along with PPE kit as an additional measure. Steps of donning would depend upon the type of the PPE that we are using, the purpose of the PPE that we are using either in a ward or in an OT setup, and whether the kit is pre-sterilized or not. As per the information available, most of the PPE kits available to us are not sterilized, and so we have to treat them as not sterilized kits, and we have to use other aseptic precautions, and I'm coming to that. Donning should be done in a separate designated area. We have to remove all accessories and wear clean surgical scrub, what is generally called as OT dress. Hand hygiene is to be performed with soap and water, and inner gloves are to be put on. Then we have to put on gum boots or shoe cover and then the inner cap. Again, perform a hand hygiene with alcohol scrub. Wear the disposable non-permeable gown, which is also known as coverall. Zip it up and leave the hood free at this point of time. Wear the N95 mask and check for air tightness. Wear the goggles covering the upper border of N95. Now wear the hood to cover the head and neck. Adjust the lapels of the hood to cover the top of the zip. Then put on the face shield or a face cover and wear the second pair of gloves and do hand hygiene over the gloves again. Put on the sterile surgical gown, which we are using, the routine green color gown that we are using, and the sterile gloves. Eventually, we'll end up having at least 3 pair of gloves on the hand after we don the PPE. Coming to the management of labor, in the first stage, the additional things that I'm going to mention is periodic respiratory monitoring with monitoring of the symptoms of fever, cough, shortness of breath, temperature, respiratory rate, and oxygen saturation.
3 pairs of gloves.
Intubation facilities and ventilatory care should be available. Intravenous fluid should be restricted, and continuous electronic fetal monitoring is advisable. That is to avoid frequent touching with the stethoscope, so EFM is considered a better modality. In the second stage, generally minimum intervention are advised, but if the second stage is to be cut short, as for example in a maternal exertion or respiratory involvement, then the instrumental delivery should be done. In a third stage, there is controversy about the cord clamping timing, but majority of the guidelines now, including ICMR and FOXI guidelines, recommend immediate cord clamping guidelines. And again, the IV fluid should be restricted because we generally tend to give oxytocics in IV form. So we need to be careful about giving a lot of IV fluid at this point of time. If a C-section is required, we have to expect a delay in emergency CS as there would be extra time for donning the PPE. Anesthesia regional is preferred. If a GA is to be needed, then pre-oxygenation and rapid sequence induction is required. What are the technical difficulties that one can face? A vision would get obscured because of the multiple layers in front of the eyes. Communication with the colleagues would become difficult, and definitely tactile perception decreases due to multiple layers of the gloves. Electrocautery use should also be avoided, and sometimes bleeding control can also become an issue. So if at all required, it should be used at a very low setting. This is known as aerosol generating procedure, and so as far as possible, it should be avoided. After a delivery or a CS, we need to doff the PPE. Doffing should also be done in a separate designated area with a vest bin. First thing is to disinfect the hands by following hand hygiene and then remove the outer gloves. Again, perform the hand hygiene. Some recommend to wear a new gloves, but even if they are not worn, that is fine. And remove surgical gown inside out. That means the outside surface should be covered while we are removing the gown. Perform hand hygiene again, remove the face shield and or the goggles. Again, perform hand hygiene, loosen the hood and unzip and remove the coverall, again inside out. Perform hand hygiene again, remove the shoe cover by holding it at the highest point and turning it inside out. Then remove N95, then remove the inner gloves. Perform hand hygiene now with the soap and water. Discard all gears in the vest bin only. As you can see, there is multiple hand hygiene to be done here, and that is because it is believed that each part of the PPE is potentially contaminated. So after touching each part of the PPE while doffing, we have to perform hand hygiene. And then we need to change to clean scrubs and discard the worn scrubs in a separate linen bag. For a neonate, Madam has already mentioned that vertical transmission is less likely. There is some emerging evidence that it may occur. We are not sure what the evidence would tell us in future, but virus has not been detected in the amniotic fluid, vaginal secretion, or the umbilical cord. Testing of the neonate for a positive mother is done with the 2 samples, one at birth and another is after 48 hours. It is to be done if the mother has acquired infection prior to 14 days of delivery or even after 28 days of the birth. That means if the COVID positivity was detected in first or second trimester, probably we may not need to screen the neonate at the time of delivery. Or if the neonate is exposed to close contact weeks, then also we need to screen the neonate. Virus doesn't secrete into the breast milk, but there is a risk of transmission through the close contact with the mother. So risk and benefit must be explained to the mother, and she needs to take a decision about what is to be done about breastfeeding. Currently at our hospital, what we practice is a temporary separation where the baby is given to somebody from the family who has not come in contact with the mother, and the express breast milk is given to the baby, or a donor milk is arranged. Some patients still may prefer a collocation where the mother is advised frequent hand washing, respiratory hygiene, cleaning of all surfaces frequently, and minimum touching of the neonate. Post-delivery cleaning is a very important part of overall management of COVID, because isolation areas, equipment, instruments, all are potential sources of infection. And so it must be done under supervision. Chlorine-based, alcohol-based, and hydrogen peroxide are the three options available to us. Once the delivery occurs either in the labor room or in the OT, body fluid spills should be treated with sodium hypochlorite 1% solution. Reusable surgical instruments and linen should be treated with half the strength of that one. Labor table, other surfaces again should be cleaned with sodium hypochlorite 1%. Electronic gadgets or delicate equipments like CTG machine, ultrasound machine, monitor should be cleaned with isopropyl alcohol. Floors, walls, and objects should be wiped with again sodium hypochlorite 1%, and that should be done 2 to 3 times in a day. After all this is done, fumigation of the space is to be done with aldehyde solution, generally silvicide. Now, this is a very interesting slide about management of COVID-19 during pregnancy, where the virus particle enters the cell and it releases multiple virus particles here. Let me tell you that the disease does not worsen in presence of pregnancy as of now with whatever current available evidence. There are two major trials going on across the globe. One is a discovery trial at Europe, and other one is a solidarity trial of WHO, where there are more than 100 countries participating. Both these trials have 4 arms, including hydroxychloroquine, lopinavir, ritonavir, with or without interferon beta-1 alpha, and remdesivir. All these trials have excluded pregnancy as of now, and so it will still take a time for us to tell whether these drugs are going to act during pregnancy or not. But I'll just show you a general way how the drugs are working. Tocilizumab and sarilumab are the interleukin-6 inhibitors, and they are thereby known to cause inhibition of cytokine storm, which is a major factor in killing the patients with COVID-19. Chemostat mesylate is acting at the entry level by blocking the receptor for the virus to enter. And convalescent plasma therapy, which has started in Kerala, also blocks the ACE2 inhibitor on the cell membrane and thereby prevents the entry of the virus particle into the cell. Hydroxychloroquine interferes with the endocytosis process, which is the next step for the virus. The antiviral drugs acts as a protease inhibitors and thereby prevents the multiple replication of the virus particle. And remdesivir is also acting as a serine protease inhibitor at this level, and that is how it's known to prevent formation of new viral particles inside the cell. We have to wait and see how these drugs are going to work in future. But once the critically ill pregnant woman is admitted with COVID-19 in an ICU, we need a team approach with certain guidelines to maintain oxygen saturation more than 94%, resort to early invasive ventilation. ECMO, which is extracorporeal membrane oxygen may be required for critically ill patients. CT chest with abdominal shield should be performed quickly. CBC, septic screen, ECG, and echo must be done. Early antibiotic should be initiated. Restrictive IV fluid should be established. Periodic lateral positioning may be advised to this patient during mechanical ventilation. And delivery should be expedited, again to decrease the extra load, as I have mentioned earlier. But the ultimate decision needs to be individualized depending on multiple factors, including patient's condition, gestation, and so on. Coming to last and important slide is the prevention of the disease for the healthcare workers. Non-pharmacological interventions are all talked about, that is social distancing, avoid touching, and so on. Use of PPE is the most important intervention. Proper training for that is required, and the person who is in charge of the hospital needs to ensure the availability of appropriate PPE for the healthcare workers. Measures to boost the immunity can also be implemented, and GOI has suggested some Ayurvedic measures under the Ayush Ministry which can be considered. Drug prophylaxis is important for the first-line healthcare workers with the hydroxychloroquine, 400 milligram twice a day, followed by 400 milligram once weekly for the 7 weeks. And counseling is also important for psychological support to motivate the healthcare workers, as they are rightly called the frontline warriors in this battle against COVID. So finally, SARS-CoV-2 is going to stay for a long, long time, if not forever. What it takes to defeat it is a change in behavior. And together we can do it. Let's do it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Ashish. And I can see that the Josh is high. And thank you for boosting our morale and making us believe that, yes, we can do it. And thanks for a very detailed description of what care needs to be taken. So thank you very much. And still, we'll be waiting during the question answer sessions. There are a lot of questions for you. We have 100+ participants, and there are a lot of questions which are pouring in. So please wait for the question answer session. Thank you so much, Dr. Ashish.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, friends. So now we know that the labor is being conducted, and probably this patient now might require some kind of anesthesia. So now our friends, the anesthetist steps in. So may I welcome Dr. Neeta Bose. Dr. Neeta, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. Hi.
Yeah, hi,
Hi.
Dr. Neeta. So we welcome
Can you
Dr.
hear me?
Yes, Dr. Neeta is an associate professor from the GMERS Gothri Medical College, again, the designated hospital for the COVID patients. So welcome, Dr. Neeta, and thank you. I can understand from your busy schedule, you have accepted our invite to join.
Hi.
Because we wanted a lot of clarity regarding the anesthesia, because, you know, you are indispensable to us. Without the anesthetist, our team is incomplete. So please guide us that suppose we have a patient who is in labor, and we might require your help. We have to take her for cesarean. So please go through the technicalities of modifying your practice whenever you are having a patient who is suspect or confirmed COVID. So please take us. Thank you.
Yes. So now
can
I'll
start
just
sharing
share my
your screen.
screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Is it visible?
Yes, yes. Perfect.
Yeah. Okay, so a little about the, the criteria for hospitalization. Probably people would have gone through, but this is the criteria: symptomatic individuals who have undertaken international travel, lab confirmed cases, healthcare personnel who are symptomatic, and all hospitalized patients with severe acute respiratory illness, SARI, that is SARI. And if patient is asymptomatic and comes in direct contact, the healthcare worker comes in direct contact with a patient and is asymptomatic, has to be tested between 5 and 14 days after the contact, which is a very big possibility. Like, you don't know that this patient is COVID or not, and this patient walks into your OPD or walks into the, it is a COVID positive. So that is one of the things we have to take care of for our healthcare workers who are asymptomatic, have come in contact with them. So they should be tested in 5 to 14 days after contact, and till the result comes, the healthcare worker can be quarantined, and if it is negative, he or she can start working. There are the clinical features which I would like to sort of present: the mild, moderate, severe illness which we are getting. Most of the cases we are getting are the mild ones. The severe ones are quite bad. There can be a whole array of pneumonia, ARDS, sepsis, and septic shock. And the very first thing that we have to take is initiation of the infection and prevention and control measures. Okay, and like it has already been talked that this is a referral center. It should be, positive cases should always be referred here. The array includes the uncomplicated cases, the mild pneumonia, the severe pneumonia, and the ARDS. Although this ARDS is very different from the ARDS that we have been seeing earlier. You know, what we call is the acute respiratory distress syndrome. The pathophysiology is still coming in bits and pieces. So whatever ventilation strategies we have been using earlier may or may not work here. You may have to prolong the intubation time, or you may have to do an early intubation. There is a lot of controversy going on that. So these are the various criteria regarding the mild, moderate, and the severe ratio is less than 100, and that is the time when the danger starts in. And or you can do an invasive ventilation. Sepsis and septic shock is the other end, where there will be another organ failure and also hypotension. Most of these patients, when they get intubated, what we have experienced is that there is a profound hypotension, and the shock sets in very quickly, and these patients, which is given in the earlier phases. Although it is said that when you're treating after the early phase is over, there should be a drying, not flooding. Flooding initially, inotropes quickly, and later on drying. And that's how you ventilate the patient. One thing regarding the Indian Society of Anesthesiologists advisory is that when such an emergency comes up and a pandemic situation comes up, for us as anesthetists, what is our role, what is our advisory from the, it has to be taken care in most of the places. Our contact is quite wide, like it is in the emergencies and the PSC, in the pain clinic, and the post-anesthesia care unit, the radiology, and we suddenly see that a lot of resources are being used up because we had some limited resources. We were working with that. Now, PPE kits being thrown, the masks being thrown, the sterilization procedures being more extravagant. So a lot of resources get used up, and because most of these patients are on oxygen, they require, whenever such a situation arises, we have to create pool of anesthetists, especially in a COVID specific hospital. You have to sort of use up your people only for the COVID area, not for the rest of the area. So elective and semi-emergency surgeries need to be deferred. And frequent hand washing has to be installed at every place, including your OTs. And sometimes if the ventilators are not there, anesthesia workstations can be used as ventilators because they give an important thing, or the general principles you say is that we have to train our staff, social surgical mask, here you can see this, like I'm totally tied up. We have to be less exposed. And mock drills regarding the PPE is important because what happens is if you don't, I mean, Ashish explained very well the steps, but if they are careless, if the healthcare workers are careless, they might get into a problem, especially when they are doffing. Okay, so if you have touched inside or something, you definitely need drills. You definitely need video recordings to show the healthcare workers. Also, mock intubation drills, I'll be coming to that later because there are certain equipments which can prevent you from the aerosolization. So you need to do it as mock drills, otherwise you are not used to that procedure. Remember, the aerosol generating procedure are intubation, extubation, suctioning, nebulization, giving the BiPAP, CPAP, and high frequency nasal oxygen cannula. Even the plain nasal cannula also, they are all aerosolizing procedures. Okay, and intubation, they say that it's better if you do it in the first cost, that's too much. PACs during a pre-anesthetic visits, we see proper history. Always remember one thing, certain things which we take for granted. There's a BP instrument, there's a stethoscope, and each and every patient that we see, because we don't know which patient will be a COVID patient. And always remember, you have to sanitize the room when you go away. But these things which we're not doing at present, but it has to be incorporated if we want to start doing the surgeries very quickly in another month or so. Disposal of PPE becomes very important because biomedical waste is a big, huge hazard. They can spread a lot of infections if we don't take it seriously. To take a bath there so that you are clean completely, so that you don't transmit it to the normal population outside. Reschedule the surgeries for elderly, most susceptible to infection, and they'll catch the COVID quite quickly. defer the chronic pain procedures. In emergency OTs, it is said that we should have a dedicated OT for this. In our hospital, we are having a OT facility within the isolation unit itself. So if it is a positive patient, definitely that patient has to be operated there. Even if the patient is a suspect and there is a very high, it should be operated in the isolation unit itself. Or we keep a dedicated OT, which has a separate wheeling in, separate entry, which may be quite cumbersome at times, but you have to have that totally separate. No mixing with the common crowd, no mixing with the other patients is important. Within the OTs, you should have negative pressure ventilation, and HEPA filters are important to filter out the viruses. ACs are not recommended because they don't do proper air circulation. So negative pressure creation is important, but many OTs may or may not have this facility. PPE has been already overemphasized. Remember, we don't need to touch surfaces, okay? So when we are anesthetizing such patients, first of all, minimum people should be going in, okay? And you prepare the drugs outside, do not keep it on the surfaces, carry it in trays and carry it back. Okay, so a lot of surface touching has to be avoided. We generally have a habit of keeping our drugs on the trolley, so no for that. And HMEs have to be used at two places. When you are attaching general anesthesia, I'll be showing a figure later on, you have to attach at the patient end as well as at the expiratory flow end also. GA, you have to, GA versus regional, I'm coming to that. Regional is always preferable, but there are some catches in that. Rapid sequence in intubation is you create an aerosol, and that's where your healthcare worker will become susceptible. Drugs are usually, as usual in first success, intubation is important. Fiber optic bronchoscopy as much as possible avoided. Video laryngoscopy is the in thing because you don't have to, go right inside the near the mouth of the patient, the oral cavity. With the video laryngoscopy, a distance is maintained, and that is preferable. Low flow circuit is important, and always remember disconnections in circuit should not be done. Whenever we are doing a general anesthesia, keep it as fit, and it should not get disconnected. Closed suction is important because sometimes there may be need to suction out the secretions, so a closed suction is important. Supraglottic airway devices are good because this is something which is placed above the glottis. You're not going inside because you're not touching inside the tracheobronchial tree, and the secretions from there can be actually having a high viral load. Antiemetics is must. Patient should not vomit in the post-op period or in the pre-op period, because again that will be with some saliva and everything, and some tracheal secretions, maybe coughs out, and that is going to create a mess, and that will be exposing you to a high viral load. And always preferably do it on the proper OT table where you are, where the anesthetist is comfortable by doing it. Something intubation hurriedly in a bedside and all is actually not recommended. Take time for it. Even the guidelines are allowing that. During transfer of the patient, if you are post-op, you're transferring patient somewhere, intubated, PPE kit, HME attached to the umbo bag is a must. You do not, do not expose the environment. So the HME attachment to the umbo bag or the tube is a must. And discarding the consumables like the breathing circuit, masks, etc. should be as a protocol. In case we are doing an ETO and all, it has to be properly stored. 1% hypochlorite has to be applied on those instruments for 15 to 20 minutes before you go give this for washing and then sending it for the ETO. It is actually preferable if there is a disposable consumable, please discard it according to the guidelines. In case certain consumables need to be decontaminated, straight away don't keep it on some surface. Keep it in a Ziploc bag so that it can be transferred out of the OT very carefully, just like a viral transport media, which VTMs, we are transporting it outside. Inside the operation theater, you need as less people as possible. Do not touch surfaces, do not touch your hair, all that. So that is again exposing the healthcare worker to the secretion. Keep 1 hour between the cases, sterilize with hydrogen peroxide, 70% alcohol for surface cleaning. As I said, showering is preferable after the case is over. And if you don't have PPE, then please refer the patient to a center where the PPEs are available in plenty and is there for all the healthcare workers. In ICUs, I'm not going into deep in the management of the ICU and all that, but negative pressure rooms, always not possible. But an alternative to that is ACs with exhaust. If you have just ACs, so if you have an exhaust mechanism, then it creates a negative pressure. ACs throw the air in, exhaust pulls the air out, so it's acceptable. Liberal oxygen therapy is important in these patients because they become hypoxic quite fast. Antibiotics is important because you need to bring down the temperature, bring down the metabolic demand on the oxygen of these patients. Optimal fluid therapy is important to prevent the acute kidney injury. And I said in the later phases, you will have to prevent the lung flooding. Nutritional support, antimicrobials, intubation precautions like goggles, face shield, and sedation to avoid the self-extubation is important. Now, goggles and face shield, thing like swimming goggles through, face shield has to be proper. It covers the front as well as the sides. So any secretion which gets thrown on your face will actually touch the face shield. Before I show the pictures of what we do for intubation or what we have kept ready, aligning the staff is very important. Infection control measures is important. Shortage of staff sometimes occur during this situation, which we have faced also. Mobilization of equipments are there, so proper equipment should be there with you, monitors, etc. And assurance to be given to the healthcare workers. And last of all, the biomedical waste. And now the CPR guidelines says that if you are not comfortable in a non-intubated patients, you may defer the CPR, or you may, just give the chest compression. You may not give the breathing, because many a times in these conditions, pandemic situations, we really can't help, and a patient may have to meet his or her own fate. This was actually part of the previous thing. You can see the secretions where can go up to 4 meters in droplet form. It can land up on the wood, paper, glass, metal, plastic. In the plastic surfaces, it stays for a very, very long time. Wood, it is also up to 4 days. So remember, the cleaning becomes very important. Whatever you've done, you've taken the patient in, you reel the patient out, but surface cleaning becomes important. Things which we can't see can be the danger for us. Like for general anesthesia, as I said, video laryngoscope, I will just touch on the most important points. Sterile plastic covers to protect your monitors and ventilator, anesthesia machine, etc. should be there. And if you have certain cables or anything running, you should be always covering it with a plastic, and that should be discarded later on. And appropriate size cuff tube and syringe for inflation very quickly. No IPPV given by intubation, and antiviral filter to be connected immediately. This is just a pic of the video laryngoscope. We all know that. And personnel should be in full PPE. Patient should be wearing a mask. If it is a positive, it is definitely there. But even if you are suspecting it to be a positive, make sure, especially if there is a community transmission going on, tell each and every patient who is given to the OT to be wearing a mask, so that no secretions are transferred at any point of time when the patient is going inside. So whenever patient gets transferred out, avoid the disconnection with the breathing circuits. Turn off the flows. Whenever you are trying to extubate a patient, turn off the flows first, then disconnect, and then pull out the tube. We have to minimize any sort of cuff reflex, any sort of aerosol formation or sputum formation which is thrown out at any point of time. So when we intubate, we do not give IPPV, straight away put in the tube. When we extubate, switch off the machine and disconnect it, and when patient is breathing properly, just remove it. Do not try to let the patient cough too much. You can do a deep extubation also in the deep, so that there is a less of the cough reflex. And as one point, last point, the clamp, you can clamp the ETT with forceps to prevent the aerosolization. So whatever secretion are there, it remains in the ETT. You can just here have already covered. Use short-acting drugs, because most of these patients behave very badly after giving the drugs. They have profound fall in the blood pressure. So many a times, if it is a patient who has any other comorbidities, you might have to keep sort of noradrenaline, etc., ready at the time of intubation. That holds true, especially in the ICUs. This is a protective covering or intubation hood that we have designed in our hospital. You can see that there are 2 holes in front from where you can put the hand through and do the intubation. The suction catheter, etc., that can be given from the side holes. The patient remains inside. The head, basically the head and the torso, upper part of the torso goes inside this intubation hood. This is how it is to be used. You can see he's attaching the HME filter right inside. So basically, when you are doing this hood thing, all your instruments should be inside, and then you do the induction and put your hands in and do the intubation. You can't be confused properly and do the intubation. I think this is one of the but mind removed. We need, and when you remove the hood, okay, so then you are in a spot and you expose yourself to the secretions. This is the attachment of the HME filter. Patient should be monitored in the operating room after the end of the case until safe and transfer according to the COVID-19 guidelines. Remember, if you transfer the patient safely out, there is less chances of healing inside. So less movement of the patient, less of the contact with the environment as well as the healthcare workers. And always you take time for you wearing the PPE. It takes time, mind well, it takes at least 10 minutes to wear the whole PPE, and again doffing is also taking 10-15 minutes, but do it carefully. It is said that if you have an observer in front of you for doffing and donning, that person can tell you properly, or you keep a mirror in front of you so that you can see that all your corners, etc., which has to be used, should be disinfected as per the institutional guidelines, but carried out of the OT in a proper manner. Now, coming to the regional anesthesia and the spinal anesthesia, always the transmission of acute respiratory infection is 6.6 times higher if a person is exposed to tracheal intubation versus to a person who is not exposed to tracheal intubation. Choice in the patients who are going for cesarean section, and the risk of the post-op complications, especially if a patient is having a respiratory involvement, general anesthesia in these patients will have effect on the lungs. There will be a problem in extubation, there will be delayed extubation. So the risk of the post-op complication also becomes lower if you use regional anesthesia. Always remember, whenever regional anesthesia is used, it is not so simple. You have to plan properly. Ultimately, it should not happen that you started with regional and there has been an unplanned conversion to a general anesthesia. If that happens, again, you are subjecting yourself to the risk of transmission of droplets. Okay, so your planning should be proper regarding the dose, the duration of the surgery. Maybe you discuss it with the surgeon how long it will take, and you can give accordingly. If you feel it was possible with spinal, but it is a long surgery, then you go for general anesthesia straight away, right away in the first part. So communication becomes important. Okay, this part I've already covered. Again, whenever it is even the regional anesthesia, your precautions remain the same. You have to take the regular precautions for droplet. Use of N95 mask is important. Patient should be always wearing a surgical mask, and avoid any too much of oxygen giving in. So if you give regional anesthesia, try not to sedate too much. Otherwise, you might have to give oxygen. Use earring, and better for an experienced person to perform. Again, when you do a lumbar puncture, be less, but still the splashing, you have to be very careful while doing it. And ultrasound equipment can be used for the other regional anesthesia, that is your regional blocks, okay, so that your drug amount is less of overdosage possibility, and your correctness of the block becomes important. So that is the other part of the regional anesthesia, which actually would not apply in a obstetric situation, but still we have to be careful, okay. So this adjustment actually has to be taken in a form that you do not convert it to GA. If you are giving epidural infusion or labor analgesia, it is better to give continuous infusion and no top-up. So you can have background infusion. So that also can be worked out. So because see, every time you go for a top-up, you are going to be in contact with the patient. So then that also can be minimalized. Or you do not go for a labor analgesia. If there is a possibility of excessive intra-op hypotension, always use the prophylactic vasopressors. Prophylactic I say because there has been few case series studies in which if you use prophylactically, the tremendous fall in the blood pressure is avoided. Try to do any chart and do not carry fomites inside as much as possible in the OT. And careful disposal of the consumables to avoid the risk of the transmission. Just a little word, ultrasound guided block is better, less sedation, continuous catheter patient. TAP block is better than a rectus spiny block, especially after your post cesarean or post hysterectomies. Also, this is used by many of the anesthetists. Now, monitoring and conduct, you have to be very careful. Do not avoid any excessive or deep sedation, and precautions during GA I've already told about. Okay, so that finishes because I don't want to go for the criteria of ICU admission. So that is my take on the spinal versus regional. And now in the times when we are going into the community transmission, consider each and every patient as to be COVID positive. So we have to go according to those guidelines itself. So that is why PPE, providing PPE in the OTs become very important. I'll be happy to take questions after that. I do not want to extend my talk to anything.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Neeta. You can stop sharing the screen. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Neeta, for the elaborate discussion. And wait for the question answer session.
Yeah.
Thank you, audience. So now we are going to discuss about the surgical response, because we have discussed about all the obstetric scenario in this situation. We want to know that the COVID-19, all of you know that has a propensity to spread at exponential rate, and it is significantly impacting our life and practice as healthcare professionals. As Dr. Neeta rightly said, that it hovers between the stage 2 and stage 3, that is the community transmission in India. So it is necessary that the surgical community develops certain guidelines to regulate the surgical procedures. As the information about its pathophysiology and transmission keeps evolving, like in today's webinar, you might hear something, yesterday was something different, and probably tomorrow there'll be change. So the guidelines have to be fluid, with a strong probability of being adapted to newly acquired information as the time passes. So we have to keep changing the guidelines as we get more and more evidence. All elective surgical cases should be postponed at the current times. COVID patients are expected to escalate, so surgical care is limited. Mind well, it is limited only to those who need it imminently. So elective surgery should be delayed until the peak of the pandemic has passed. Teleconsultation and social distancing is advised. This minimizes the risk to both patient, healthcare team, also minimizes the utilization of the necessary resources such as beds, ventilators, PPEs. Emergency surgery, suppose there's a ruptured ectopic or a torsion or a borderline cancer patient who may progress. So these only can be done in the present scenario. Detailed history and everything has been covered. RT-PCR ELISA of COVID should be done if possible. And if testing is not done, you have to consider the patient as potentially infected. So PPE is for all OT personnel and follow the CDC guidelines that has been discussed. What I want to mainly emphasize is about that there is a lot of misconception regarding laparoscopy, but there is no much scientific evidence to support the notion that laparoscopy poses a higher risk to OT personnel as compared to the conventional surgery specific to COVID-19. Prior surgeries have demonstrated presence of other viruses from the infected tissue in the surgical smoke, but mind well, COVID does not colonize in the peritoneal cavity. So only way you can get it in the peritoneal cavity is if there is a pleuroperitoneal fistula. So laparoscopy is safe with due precautions. This is the latest paper from Morris and Amanda on 3rd of April. SARS-CoV-2 primarily is a non-living particle which attaches to the host cell and expresses its genome. So that is the virion. So it attaches only to certain cells and not into the peritoneal cavity. But still, the following are the precautions which we should take during laparoscopy. Sudden desufflation can be potentially releasing the aerosolized particle into the OT environment. So avoid sudden desufflation from the main port at the end of the surgery. Avoid leakage of the gas from the valves of the side ports. Avoid sudden...
Sorry, I'm interrupting you, but we are not able to see your slides. Can you just make sure that slides are there on the screen?
I can see the slides. Should I stop and then share again?
Because we have received the same query in the checkbox also that your slides are not visible.
So they were not visible from the beginning?
Yes, from the beginning, yes.
Oh. Okay, I'll go again.
You can try to share again. I mean, we have heard what we have said.
Got it.
Sorry, madam. Minute left.
So, Jignesh bhai, can you be more clear? Dr. Ashish, now do you have
10
my
minutes
slides?
left.
Okay. Dr. Ashish, do you have my slides now?
Yes, we have the slides. Jignesh bhai is saying that we have 10 minutes left.
No,
So
I heard that. I have just 2 more slides.
Slides are visible now.
Okay. Yeah, fine. So what I was trying to say is that we are supposed to do only elective surgeries. This was the slides. I'll just rush through because the time is less. The guidelines are evolving and we have to keep them fluid. So all elective surgeries to be postponed, only emergency surgeries to be taken. We have already discussed PPE. What I want to emphasize is that laparoscopy is safe with certain precautions. Sudden desufflation is to be avoided so that we don't release aerosol particle in the OT environment. That point has been discussed. Care should be taken to safely evacuate the pneumo. You can use the filters so that the released CO2 is filtered off the aerosolized viral particles. Electrocautery should be kept at the low power setting and to minimize the smoke. And very important is that you can use the suction devices to evacuate the smoke and the aerosol from the abdomen. Preferably the suction machine with 2 bottles in a serial circuit, and the first bottle can be filled with hypochlorite to allow gas to bubble through it. An exit sequence after the surgery is over, that first the surgical team comes out, then the patient after the extubation, then the anesthesia team, and last the cleaning and the sterilization crew, and all the OT instruments have to be disinfected with 1% hypochlorite at least for 30 minutes and followed by ETO if possible. The benefits of the minimal access surgery would be a reduced length of stay in the hospital, reduced footfalls in the hospital, faster convalescence, potential for ultrafiltration of majority of particles. See, this is not possible in open surgery. And filtration, these are the recommendations from the SAGES and the AMASI. Also, I saw that in the chat box, there was a lot of queries. So this is a very important and the latest share that COVID-19 testing now is possible. The RT-PCR is available. Although we need to follow the ICMR guidelines, but we can do it with a paid modality for our patients. So definitely you can add in the complaints and you can get this test done. So that slide has been shared. So the situation is rapidly evolving. New evidence is emerging virtually every day. So please keep updating from the authentic sources. So I will exit from the share and we'll take up the questions fast. Yeah.
Well, I want to say something.
Yes, sir.
One thing I want to make it sure that this COVID-19 is going to stay with us, like what HIV scare was there, then H1N1 scare, we got used to it. Even
Right.
this is going to stay with us, so everyone can start their own OPD with all the precautions.
Right.
Social distancing, hand hygiene, respiratory hygiene, and all other precautions, cleanliness should be kept, and everybody can have their OPDs running. And in fact, emergency surgeries or whatever surgeries are required.
Okay. Can I take up the questions fast? Dr. Ashish, Dr. Komal Patel from Parul Institute, she is asking that we wear PPE only in order.
Travel safely.
Okay, so even if progress.
Or you, if it's a positive patient, it has to be worn.
Okay. Dr. Nandita, Madam, Dr. Sushma Bakshi has asked, what is the risk?
Instruments that we are using, it has to be 0.5%. Rest all is 1%.
Okay. So even for the mopping of floor and everything, 1%.
1%.
Right. Yeah, Dr. Neeta, there was a question that suppose we have a case of ruptured ectopic, which type of anesthesia would you give?
Ruptured ectopic, we are going to experience a lot of turbulence in the patient. So go straight away for the general anesthesia with the proper precaution. If we are going to anticipate GA somewhere down the line, it is better to go for GA from the first.
Okay. While sir, Dr. Yogini Rolekar is asking about the consent for the OPD. Like, do you need a special consent for the OPD procedures?
Just on that COVID-19, it is implied that this patient, when they are visiting or moving out of the house, they may contract COVID-19. But it's to be on the safer side, it is better that we get a written consent.
Okay. Dr. Dhanusha Shah from Baroda was asking about that whether the baby will be affected. Dr. Nandita Madam has already covered this in her slides. Regime for the pregnant COVID female patients. Dr. Jagruti was asking about the role of prophylactic drugs. So in a pregnant patient, will you, madam, be giving prophylactic drugs if she is not a health worker?
Is she COVID positive or not positive?
No. Prophylactic. Will you give just that because
I don't give any.
Okay, but if she is a pregnant and a gynecologist herself working, then?
Even then, no prophylaxis. Avoid face-to-face contact after 28 weeks.
Okay.
Prophylaxis is only for those who are the frontline workers who are coming in direct contact with the patient, like for examining, delivering, doing a section. For all those, prophylaxis is there. Otherwise, if you are working in a non-COVID hospital, there are no recommendations for prophylaxis as of now.
Right. Dr. Ashish, so I presume that all of you must have taken the prophylaxis in the GMERS. Now, do you go for the G6PD testing or any ECG or anything before giving the HCQ?
If there is a background medical history, yes, one should rule out those problems. Basically, what we are worried about, the cardiac problems, retinal problems, liver problems. So we have to rule out those things before going for prophylaxis if you have a background history. But if you do not have a background history, it's not a universally recommended screening for all. Dr. Neeta wants to add to that.
Yeah. Yes, Dr. Neeta.
That is why the policy has been made in our hospital that it is not going to be given like a off-the-counter thing. It has to be going through the medicine OPD. The physician examines and.
Okay. Yeah, and Dr. Ashish, you can take this.
Says baseline go for it. So I think the prescription is.
Yeah, actually we have some interruptions in Dr. Neeta's internet. Dr. Ashish, you can take this question. Dr. Archana is asking, is vaginal delivery safe? I think yes, because vaginal secretions have proven not to have this virus. The other question is...
I would say that though we are saying safe, though the guidelines are saying safe, practically all those who have worked in this pandemic, they have conducted cesarean section. So we have to take it with a pinch of salt.
Right. Because this prolonged wait.
It is practical that wearing a PPE kit for 8 hours or 10 hours is very cumbersome.
That's what I covered in my talk.
Agree. And do you conduct any specific test? Dr. Archana has asked. Any test for the newborn? If the newborn is fine, do you conduct any test
sorry
who is born to a COVID positive?
For the COVID positive, two swabs which I have mentioned are to be done. But other than that, if the neonate is asymptomatic, there is no extra screening required.
Okay, Dr. Dheer sir has asked that what is, like suppose there is a, Dr. Neeta, ventilator is not useful in 20% of cases. So which are those cases in which even after ventilator you're not able to, yeah, Dr. Pawan Dheer from Bharuch.
Yeah, what happens is we try to prolong the threshold becomes much higher for intubation, and only there will be certain cases where patient is not cerebral hypoxia is there, or patient is becoming drowsy. In those cases, probably we'll have to go and intubate straight away, because we have found literature from various sources that patients on ventilator, 86% don't do well, they die. The mortality rate is quite high in these patients, so we have to take a call between the good or the bad of the ventilation and then go for it.
Okay, Dr. Walia sir, Dr. Dheer wants to know.
Madam, 30 seconds left only.
Okay, there's
Only
a patient from UK for frozen embryo transfer. Her mother was positive. Walia sir, when are you going to call her?
I see our society or actually everybody agrees on that. As present, we are not opening up our cans.
Okay, fine. So, and Dr. Parul madam had asked about precaution for newborn. I think that's been covered. So I take this opportunity to thank my SLS for their very tremendous inputs, very positive inputs. Thank you audience, 100+ audience for joining this in our quest from confusion to clarity. And so stay safe, happy learning, we keep meeting.
I would like to thank you all.
Yeah, thank you
sir.
Alembic
I
for.
would like to thank you, Dr.
Thank you so
Vinay
much.
sir, Dr. Ajay Walia sir, Dr. Ashish sir, Dr. Neeta madam, Dr. Nandita madam,
Yeah.
and all participants. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, and there were few
Thank
questions in the chat box which we will try to reply. We'll send some mails. There was about how to make hypochlorite or consent paper. So probably we can share it later.
Maybe we can have a second part of this webinar because there are going to be a lot of questions, Veena.
Exactly,
Yes,
and it
part two
keeps
we can
evolving.
connect. We can say part two. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Nish, I'm disconnecting.